Why did no one look at her when she walked into the mess hall? Was she invisible, or did they simply wish she were? Sergeant Eva Rostova paused just inside the doorway, letting the wave of heat, noise, and sour diesel-laced air wash over her. It was her third day on base, and already she had mastered the only survival skill a stranger needed at Fob Griffin: keep your head down, take up no space, and hope the wolves were busy fighting each other. She crossed to the far corner and sat alone, as she always did, moving with that small, precise efficiency that seemed to irritate people without ever intending to. Her fork scraped softly against her tray, the bland chicken steaming in the dim light. Voices roared around her, stories told too loud, laughter that tried too hard, the bravado of men trying to survive their own fear. And inside their noise, she sat like a ghost they refused to acknowledge. But someone was watching. Sergeant Rex Bulldog Miller was a man who breathed dominance the way others breathed oxygen, the kind who measured the world in threats and submission. And there she was, silent, composed, unimpressed. A puzzle he didn't like, a mirror he did not want to look into. He rose from his table, two corporals trailing behind him like shadow creatures that fed on whatever scraps of cruelty he dropped. His boots thumped against the plywood floor, each step a warning. He stopped beside her table, towering over her. "Well, look what we got here," he boomed, forcing the tent into uneasy silence. "Quartermaster Princess, everything to your liking, Sergeant. Chicken not too dry for that delicate palate of yours." She didn't flinch, didn't look up. The soft clink of her spoon against the tray was her only answer. And somehow that sound, small, unbothered, infuriated him more than any insult could have. He leaned over her, shadow swallowing her food. "You too good to talk to real soldiers." A few men smirked, some looked away. Conflict made everyone a coward in different ways. Then he stumbled. Too deliberate, too theatrical. The plastic cup in his hand tipped, and the lurid purple drink inside cascaded straight onto her head, ice sliding through her tightly pinned hair, the syrupy liquid dripping down her collar. It was cold, shockingly cold. But she didn't move. She sat for 3 long seconds, still as stone. The entire tent grew quiet enough for her heartbeat to be the loudest sound in her world. She simply set her spoon down, a single click of metal on plastic. Clean. Final. Then she stood. No anger, no raised voice, no warning. Her left hand snapped down, not a punch, not even an aggressive motion. Just a palm strike to the side of Miller's knee, placed with surgical precision. His leg buckled before his brain understood what had happened. Her right hand rose, knuckles aligned, a movement too fluid for someone who supposedly filed papers for a living. Before he could inhale to shout, her strike found the nerve cluster beneath his ear. A soft thud, not dramatic but devastating. His eyes rolled back, and his body collapsed like someone had cut invisible strings. 200+ pounds of swagger hit the floor in absolute silence. She stepped over him, purple liquid still dripping onto his unconscious face, and walked out of the mess hall without a single glance behind her. No triumph, no apology, only purpose. People didn't breathe until she was gone. But inside that silence, a different story began to form, one that no one dared speak aloud yet. Who exactly was she? Colonel Thorne wanted an answer. He summoned her within minutes. His office was cold, unreasonably cold, like discipline itself lived there and refused to sweat. Maps covered the walls, red circles, arrows, the language of men who thought wars were solved on paper. He stared at her like she was a misprint. "Assaulting a senior NCO in my mess hall?" he asked, voice low and razor sharp. "You've been here 72 hours, Sergeant. Miller's been here 7 years." Miller sat to the side, jaw blooming with a purpling bruise, pride more wounded than flesh. He stared at Eva with a hatred that was uneasy, because beneath it was something else, something he didn't yet understand. "He poured a drink on my head, sir. She spoke like she was reciting an inventory number, plain, factual. And your response, Thorne snapped, was to render him unconscious. He studied her face, hunting for guilt, fear, anything human. He found nothing. Your file is clean, he continued. Too clean, logistics, supply chain, efficiency awards, no combat deployments, no disciplinary issues. He leaned back, eyes narrowing. So tell me, where did you learn to drop a man twice your size with one blow? Self-defense, sir. It wasn't an answer, and he knew it. You're a disruption, he said finally. I don't need disruptions. You want to be alone. Fine. Echo 7 Supply Depot. Inventory every crate by Friday, every bullet, every box. It wasn't just punishment, it was exile. Yes, sir. She saluted and left. Miller tried to protest, tried to claw back some dignity, but Thorne shut him down with a tone that froze the air around them. The colonel felt something he couldn't name yet, a wrongness in her file, a weight in her silence, a question forming at the back of his mind. What did I just send out to the perimeter? Echo 7 stood on the western edge of the base, the forgotten place where heat piled on heat and dust swallowed everything. But she walked into it without hesitation. Containers rusted by sun and time lined the gravel like tombstones. She unlatched the first one and stale air blasted out. Ammunition crates, faded stencils. She cataloged them with immaculate precision. Her movements were steady, clean, ritualistic, as if order itself lived inside her bones. Sweat dripped down her neck, mixing with the dried purple stain Miller had left on her earlier. She ignored it. She ignored everything. She worked until the sun began to fall, until twilight painted the sky bruised and uncertain. And then the world changed. One sound at first, a distant thump. Then another. Then many. Incoming mortar rounds shrieked overhead, exploding in geysers of earth and fire. Machine guns erupted. Sirens wailed like something dying. The base was under attack. Eva did not panic. She did not flinch. She set down her scanner. She stepped to the edge of the container and watched the perimeter burning. The guard post to her left RPG. Gone. Two young soldiers, Chun and Diaz, alone, pinned behind sandbags, firing wildly, terror turning their movements sloppy and desperate. The breach was coming straight for her sector. Her punishment. Her exile. Her perimeter. A place no one cared about. A place they thought didn't matter. She saw the enemy moving, disciplined and fast, slipping through the wire like a shadow army. Fire teams, suppressive fire, coordination. Her breathing slowed. Something inside her shifted, quietly, completely. The logistician vanished. And the thing that replaced her moved with a purpose the world had forgotten she had. She turned back to the containers, not to run, not to hide. To select tools. To solve a problem. To fight. But there was something she hadn't told them, not yet. Something that slept in her bones, waiting for moments like this. And the enemy was about to wake it. What made her so calm while everyone else was breaking? Even she didn't fully know the answer, not consciously. Not yet. But as the enemy poured through the breach, she understood one thing with absolute clarity. If she didn't move, if she didn't act, Chun and Diaz would die within minutes. She didn't run toward them. She ran toward the materials. Inventory was her language. Logistics was her world. Even now, especially now, her mind drew maps between objects, paths, timing, angles, probabilities, as if the world arranged itself in grids only she could see. Container 3, ammunition. Container 7, pyrotechnics. Container 5, communication gear useless for now. She chose her tools the way others chose breaths. 4 magazines of 5.56, a discarded M4 from one of the fallen guards, a flare pistol, 3 trip flares, a chem light, and a calmness that felt unnatural even to her, not adrenaline, not fearlessness. Something colder. She moved like she had rehearsed this exact moment in another life. The first shot she took came from the rooftop of a container, not because she wanted the height advantage, but because the attackers did not expect it. Predictability killed. Surprise bought seconds. Seconds saved lives. She lay flat on the corrugated steel, the fading twilight washing everything in purples and dying gold. Her cheek pressed to the iron sights. Breath in, half out, trigger slow. The enemy leader staggered, dropped. Confusion rippled through the attackers. She was already crawling, shifting, repositioning. When the RPK gunner appeared beneath her, she exhaled. Crack. Dust rose around his fallen body. Only then did the enemy realize something terrifying. They weren't being fired on by chance. They were being hunted by precision. Bullets clanged against the metal beneath her like angry fists. She moved before the steel even finished ringing. She flowed down the back side of the container, landing silently on bent knees. Chun and Diaz were still alive, barely firing blindly in panic, their hands shaking, their breaths ragged. Diaz reloaded with trembling fingers. Chun yelled something she couldn't hear, voice cracking. Diaz, she called, never shouting but speaking with a clarity that cut through chaos. Left flank, 3-round bursts, conserve ammo. He jerked with surprise, eyes wide. Ahoo! Chun, she continued, ditch on your right side, they'll push through it next. Her tone wasn't a suggestion. It wasn't even an order. It was certainty, final, calm, absolute. Something inside both young soldiers obeyed automatically, the same way a drowning man grabs a rope even before he registers what it is. Their firing stabilized, their breathing steadied. And Eva moved again. She slipped between containers, the narrow steel corridors turning into alleyways of shadow and ricochets. Each footstep was silent. Each decision was instant and exact. She planted trip flares with practiced precision, angles, spacing, expected path of advance. She loaded the flare pistol. She checked the M4. She watched the attackers adapt, regroup, communicate through hand signals. They were good, disciplined, experienced. But they had no idea what they were walking into. When the first fire team sprinted through the open ground, she fired the flare. Red light ripped open the night, harsh, unkind. Shadows stretched like spears. The 4 men froze in the sudden exposure. Crack, 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 crack. 4 silhouettes dropped almost in unison. Another group shifted right, aiming to flank through the ditch, right into her trip flares. One ignited, then the second, then the third. Blinding magnesium white turned night into burning daylight. Chun and Diaz fired into the revealed figures, rounds finding targets they never would have seen a second earlier. For a moment, a fragile, fleeting moment, the line held. But the enemy wasn't done. Behind the berm, an RPG team formed. She saw the backblast before she saw the weapon. She didn't think. Instinct older than her current life threw her into the narrow gap between containers, just as the rocket slammed into the metal where she had been seconds before. The explosion tore the world open. The container wall bowed inward, screeching like metal in agony. Shrapnel sliced the air. The blast wave hurled her backward, skull snapping against steel, vision smearing into streaks of white and black. For a moment she lay in silence. No sound, just ringing, a void. Footsteps crunched on gravel. Enemy voices barked commands. Chun's rifle clicked empty. Diaz cursed. The attack was collapsing into a final push. They were terrified, running low on ammunition. The flares had burned out. The advantage she created was slipping. Eva blinked, head pounding. Blood trickled warm down her arm where metal had torn her shirt and skin. Her breath shook, but only once. She pressed her palm to the wound, found it manageable, and wrapped it with a strip of fabric torn from her sleeve. Pain was data. She rose to her knees. Her rifle was gone, thrown somewhere into the dark by the blast. Only her M9 remained. The enemy was meters away. She steadied her breathing, hand resting on the pistol. She could hear her heart now not as fear but as a distant, disciplined drum. Inside the ringing void of her hearing, a memory flickered, not visual but physical. Muscle memory, training scars, movements ingrained long before she ever wore a quartermaster patch. She slid into the shadow between the containers, every sense sharpening. The enemy voices were louder now, footsteps approaching, weapons raised. They thought she was wounded. They thought she was cornered. Cornered meant nothing to her. The first man rounded the corner. She stepped forward, not back, and slammed her forearm into his rifle, redirecting it as she drove the heel of her hand into his jaw. He collapsed before his finger even twitched on the trigger. The second raised his barrel. She fired once. Center of mass. He dropped hard. The third hesitated just for a breath, but hesitation around her was fatal. She swept his leg, grabbed his collar, and smashed the back of his head against the steel wall with a dull, resonant thud. 3 bodies hit gravel. She kept moving. Her movements were fluid, not frantic. Efficient, not wild. Precision in every strike, every breath, every step. Training that should not have belonged to a logistics sergeant. Training that scared even her sometimes, not because of what she could do, but because she rarely remembered learning it. Was it instinct? Or something else, something buried deep? She didn't have time to answer that. Chun screamed, a short, sharp sound of fear. The last of his ammunition clattered to the ground. Diaz yelled for help. Shadows closed in around their sandbag wall. And Eva moved faster. She sprinted from the containers, sprinting low across open ground just as the last of the attackers charged forward. Her pistol cracked, each shot muffled by battle noise, each round finding a target or forcing one to take cover. She slid behind the sandbags, landing between the 2 young soldiers. They stared at her like she was a myth. "On me," she said softly. Diaz gulped. Chun nodded, shaking. "You 2 stay alive, I'll handle the rest." But there was something she hadn't told them. Something she still refused to acknowledge in herself. Something that would soon force its way back into the light. What made her speak with such calm when death was crawling toward them? Chun didn't know. Diaz didn't know. And in truth, Eva wasn't sure either. She only knew the fear in their eyes because she had once carried that same fear, long ago in another life, before someone had carved it out of her and replaced it with something colder, quieter, more disciplined than courage. But tonight wasn't about her. Tonight was about them, and about the breach behind them that could swallow the entire fob if the line didn't hold. She lifted her head just slightly above the sandbags. Shadows moved in the fading light. 10, no, 12, maybe more. They were regrouping after the losses, angrier now, smarter. Their leader barked a command she recognized, not the words but the cadence. He was sending 3 to flank, 2 to lay suppressing fire, and the rest to rush once Chun and Diaz ran dry. Predictable, efficient, deadly if unchecked. She lowered herself again. "How many mags do you have left?" she asked. Chun swallowed, half of one. Diaz shook his head. "I'm empty, I think I'm empty." Fear made his voice crack on the last word. Eva didn't judge him. Fear made people honest. She handed him one of her own magazines. "Load it, slow, don't rush." Diaz nodded, hands shaking but trying. Chun's breath trembled. "Sarge, are we gonna survive this?" Her answer was simple. "If you listen to me, yes." They believed her, not because they understood her, but because she understood the battlefield around them with a clarity they could feel, even if they didn't see it. Gunfire erupted again. Dirt kicked up around the sandbags. The enemy was testing them, probing, adjusting fire, trying to find a weakness, trying to make them panic. Eva didn't panic. She moved. Chun, she said softly, when I give the word, you'll fire 2 rounds at that far left shadow against the berm, not to hit him, to distract him. Why? Because they think we're blind, she said. We're not. She peered over the edge again. The flanking team was moving. Slow, low, confident. 3 figures creeping through the ditch exactly where she'd told Chun to watch last time. They were 20 meters out. 19. 18. She breathed in the dust, let it settle inside her lungs like old memory. Chun, she whispered, now. 2 cracks left his rifle. Not clean, not perfect, but enough. The flanking team froze, unsure if they'd been spotted. That was all she needed. She rose halfway, bracing her forearm on the sandbags, and fired 3 rapid shots. One dropped instantly. The second stumbled back, clutching his chest. The third dove but was hit before he hit the ground. Cover, she commanded, and Chun ducked as a wave of return fire roared above them. Diaz fumbled his magazine into place. Holy crap, I mean how? She didn't answer. She didn't need to. She was already scanning the battlefield again, mentally drawing paths through the shadows. The main assault element shifted tactics. They stopped wasting bullets on the sandbags and began pushing forward in slow, coordinated movement, fire teams alternating suppression and advance. Professional, experienced, and hungry. Eva could hear it in their steps. They thought they were close to breaking the line. But they didn't understand the terrain like she did. They didn't understand her. She touched Chun's shoulder, light, controlled. Stay low, stay still. You fire only when I tell you. He nodded, eyes wide but resolute. She turned to Diaz. When I move, you cover Chun's side. Don't shoot unless you have a clear target. Diaz breathed out shakily. What about you? And for the first time that night, she offered a tiny, almost imperceptible smile, thin, tired but real. I'll be where they least expect. She slipped away before either could protest. The battlefield swallowed her in seconds. One moment she was between them, the next she was sliding between the containers like a shadow unhooked from its owner. She hugged the steel wall, keeping low, breath synced with the gunfire rhythm. Footsteps approached, the enemy's confidence building. Good. Confidence made people sloppy. She reached the back side of the containers, where the blast had buckled the steel and scattered debris across the gravel. The air still smelled of burnt propellant and shattered metal. Her gash pulsed with heat, but the makeshift bandage held. She crouched low, listening. Voices close. She waited for the pattern. There. She stepped out just enough to see the silhouettes of 2 fighters advancing cautiously, rifles raised. She didn't fire. Not yet. They needed to get closer, close enough to be certain, close enough that the bodies would fall where she needed them. They took 3 more steps. Her fingers squeezed lightly. 1 round, 2 bodies falling almost together. A clean pair. But the third fighter behind them reacted fast, too fast, and fired as she ducked back. The round sparked off the steel inches from her head. She rolled to the side, breath steady, heart not racing but focused. She fired twice more. Another body crumpled. Their momentum faltered again. Her movements were slower now, not from fear but from blood loss and exhaustion. Each breath felt heavier. Each motion cost something. But she pressed on. Because Chun and Diaz were still alive, and because somewhere deep inside her, she still believed that protecting people meant something, even if she didn't remember why. A sudden burst of gunfire erupted from near the sandbags. Her head snapped toward the sound. Diaz shouted, they're pushing hard. She sprinted. Her legs protested, her arm throbbed. Her vision wavered for a fraction of a second, but she forced it all down. Pain was background noise. Fear was irrelevant. Only movement mattered. She slid back into position behind the sandbags, just as Chun fired his last round. The empty click echoed too loudly. Eva rose, pistol steady, and began firing precise, measured shots at the advancing silhouettes. Each impact slowed the push. Each hesitation bought seconds. But there were too many, too close, too determined. Chun was breathing too fast. Diaz was shaking, eyes burning with dread. Their rifles were nearly useless now, dry, dirty, overheated. Eva didn't hesitate. "Both of you, fall back behind me," she said. "What? No. Now." They obeyed. The remaining attackers surged. Eva stepped forward. She didn't think about the odds, didn't think about the base, didn't think about the life she had tried to bury under a fake logistics record. She only thought about the next 2 seconds. The first attacker lunged. She fired point blank, one shot throat. Before he even fell, she pivoted, slamming her elbow into the next man's face, driving him sideways into another burst of friendly fire. She used the body as cover, firing again over the shoulder. Her movements were no longer clean, they were survival, raw, efficient. And something else. Something that felt like memory coming alive under her skin. She dropped another and another and another. But the last one, the last fighter, was fast. Too fast. He ducked under her pistol and swung the butt of his rifle at her skull. She took the blow hard. The world jolted sideways. She staggered. Pain erupted across her temple, hot and bright. She saw stars. He raised the rifle again. Diaz screamed her name. Chun shouted something desperate. She moved before she consciously chose to. Her hand shot to her belt, drawing her knife in one silent flash. She stepped inside the arc of his swing and drove the blade forward. He fell without a sound. And then, just like that, silence. The breach was empty. Bodies littered the gravel. Smoke drifted across the ground. The only sound left was the distant chaos of the base responding to the larger attack, and the ragged breathing of 2 young soldiers who had expected to die. Eva stood in the middle of the carnage, shoulders rising and falling slowly, pistol hanging at her side. Her bandage had soaked through. Her face was smeared with dust and blood. She looked like a woman carved out of war itself. Chun stared at her in awe. Diaz whispered, Who are you?" Eva didn't answer. Because the truth was beginning to wake inside her, and it scared her more than the attack ever did. Why did his question, "Who are you?" hurt more than the shrapnel tearing at her arm? Eva didn't know. Maybe because she didn't have an answer, not one she could say aloud, not one she trusted herself to remember. Something inside her had awakened during the fight, moving her hands, guiding her shots, making decisions faster than thought. But now, with silence hanging broken and fragile over the Echo 7 depot, the weight of it pressed deep inside her chest. Diaz kept staring at her like she was a ghost wearing a uniform. Chun swallowed hard, voice barely above a whisper. "Sergeant, that wasn't training. People they don't move like that." Eva didn't respond. Not yet. She was listening to the distant battle as it faded into small pockets of scattered gunfire. The main assault had been repelled. She could hear the shift in the rhythm, the frantic to the organized, the desperate to the disciplined. The fob wasn't safe, not yet, but it was no longer dying. She holstered her pistol, fingers trembling only once before steadying. "We're not done," she said quietly. "Stay alert." But the truth was, she was slowing. The adrenaline that had carried her through the breach now began leaking out of her body like air from a punctured tire. The dull throb in her skull deepened. Her arm pulsed in hot, numbing waves. Blood loss made the edges of her vision swim. Her breath tasted metallic. She pushed through it. Pain was data, injury was delay, survival was movement. She stepped past Chun and Diaz, scanning each fallen enemy for weapons, intel, explosives, anything missed in the chaos. Her movements were functional, efficient, silent, and unnervingly practiced. Chun watched with wide eyes. "You're bleeding, Sarge." She ignored him. Diaz stepped forward. Let us help. Stay where you are, she said, tone too calm to argue with. I'll sweep, you two cover me. They obeyed instinctively. Even in exhaustion, she commanded the ground she walked on. But beneath her calm, something else stirred, a heaviness, a memory she couldn't grasp but could feel, like a hand pressing on the back of her mind. A memory that smelled like smoke and cold metal, a memory with a name she wasn't ready to speak. Her boot nudged a rifle on the ground. She picked it up, checked the chamber, cleared it. Muscle memory guided her hands, not thought. Diaz exhaled shakily behind her. You saved us. Eva didn't turn. That was the job. No, he whispered. You saved the whole damn base. Eva paused, not because she cared about the praise, but because she recognized the weight of the silence after it. A silence filled with awe, confusion, and something else. Fear. Not fear of what had attacked them. Fear of her. Chun finally spoke, voice small. Sergeant, that was more than soldiering. You moved like you knew everything they were going to do. Eva let the words settle in the air. She didn't want to acknowledge them, didn't want to think about what it meant, didn't want to face the truth she had buried under paperwork, supply manifests, logistics certifications. A truth that Colonel Thorne had unknowingly dragged back into the light. She knelt beside a fallen enemy fighter, her hands moving through his gear with cold precision. Extra ammunition, water, a map marked with a pen. She folded it neatly and slipped it into her pocket. Let's go, she said softly. We need to signal the perimeter teams. But when she stood again, the world tilted sideways, just slightly, just enough to betray her exhaustion. The wound on her arm pulsed harder, leaking through the makeshift bandage. Her breathing stuttered. Chun took a step forward. Sarge, you're hurt. Eva steadied herself against the container wall. I'm fine. You're not, you're. Chun, she said gently, if I was in trouble, you wouldn't have needed to tell me. He shut his mouth, cheeks flushing. But Diaz wasn't convinced. Sergeant, you don't have to pretend you're made of steel. She almost laughed at that. If only he knew. She turned toward the breach. The wire was torn open like an animal's wound, twisted metal, blown sand, footprints leading in and out. The desert wind whistled softly through it, carrying the smell of gunpowder and hot earth. Movement, Chun whispered suddenly. Sarge, someone's coming. They tensed, weapons raised. A flashlight bobbed in the darkness. Another. Then a familiar voice shouted, rough and angry and out of breath. Miller, QRF inbound. Eva didn't lower her pistol. Not until Sergeant Rex Bulldog Miller emerged from the shadows, leading a squad of exhausted, panting infantrymen. Dust coated their gear. Sweat streaked their faces. Their eyes scanned the carnage with dawning horror. What the hell, Miller breathed. He froze when he saw her. She stood in the center of the kill zone, blood-soaked sleeve, bruised temple, dirt smeared across her face, but upright, steady, watching him without blinking. Chun and Diaz beside her, rifles lowered but alert. Behind them a field of bodies, shell casings, burn marks, flares still smoking, a bent container wall from the RPG blast. The scene was impossible to process all at once. Miller finally exhaled, the sound shaky. All of this was you. Not accusation. Not mockery. Something entirely different. Fear. Respect. Confusion. Eva said nothing. She saw the moment realization cracked across his face, the way his jaw tightened, the way his shoulders dropped, the way the last piece of his arrogance peeled off like flacking paint. He had humiliated her in the mess hall. She had saved the entire western perimeter. Miller swallowed, Sergeant I. But his words were cut off by the roar of a vehicle engine. Colonel Thorne's truck slammed to a stop. He climbed out fast, faster than his age or rank should have allowed, eyes sharp, movements clipped, his face pale. He was expecting death. Bodies. Slaughter. He wasn't expecting this. His gaze swept the breach, the fallen attackers, the flares, the damage, Chun, Diaz, Miller, and finally. Sir. She watched him without emotion, but something in her eyes shifted when she saw him, only for a moment. Recognition. Not of him. Of what he represented. Command, authority, a reminder of another life. Thorn stepped forward slowly, boots crunching gravel. What happened here? He demanded, voice strained. Diaz spoke first. Sir, she happened. Chun nodded. We'd be dead without her. Thorn's eyes widened slightly, but he wasn't looking at them. He wasn't even looking at the bodies. He was looking at her stance, her posture, the way she held her pistol, the blood on her sleeve, the way she didn't flinch, didn't tremble, didn't look away. He saw it. Not the battle. The truth underneath it. A truth buried in a file that should never have existed. A truth with a name he hoped he never had to say aloud. His voice dropped. Sergeant Rostova, your file says logistics. She didn't blink. Yes, sir. This wasn't logistics. No, sir. What was it? Her voice was quiet, almost tired. Survival. Thorn swallowed hard, studying her more closely now. Her knuckles, her movements, her breath, her control. Everything he had missed before because he hadn't been looking. This time he saw her. And it scared him. Behind him, Miller whispered, she's not what her file says, not even close. Eva looked away, down toward the breach, the darkness beyond it, the desert wind moving across the dunes. Thorn followed her gaze. Something tightened in his expression. Sergeant, he said, voice suddenly softer, how did you learn to move like that? Eva didn't answer. Because saying the truth out loud would make it real. And she wasn't sure she wanted it to be real again. Why did his question feel like a trap, one she had spent years outrunning? Eva kept her eyes on the dark horizon, refusing to meet Colonel Thorn's stare. The desert was quiet again, but not peaceful. Quiet the way a battlefield becomes quiet after the dying stops, but before the living understand what survived inside them. Chun shifted beside her, uncertain. Diaz wiped blood from his cheek, still trembling. Miller looked between her and Thorn, as if watching two predators circle each other. But Eva didn't answer the colonel's question. Because she couldn't. Because the truth wasn't a sentence, it was a scar. And scars weren't spoken, they were carried. Thorn stepped closer. Sergeant, he said, voice low, almost cautious, I'm asking you directly, where did you learn to do all of this? She finally looked at him. Her gray eyes were empty, not cold, not violent, not proud. Empty in a way that made Thorn flinch. Empty like a locked door behind which something dangerous slept. Sir, she said softly, you gave me a job, I completed it. That is not an answer. It's the only one I have. Silence pulsed between them, a silence so thick the other soldiers didn't dare breathe. Miller shifted his weight. Colonel, with respect, she saved us. I don't care how she learned, just. Sergeant Miller, Thorn snapped, your opinions are not requested. But even as he said it, his gaze drifted again, toward the corpses Eva had left scattered across a stretch of gravel that looked like it had swallowed a small war. No logistics sergeant can do this, he murmured. Eva didn't deny it. She didn't confirm it either. She simply remained still. For Thorn, that was worse. He exhaled slowly, voice tight. Medical team is coming, stand by. But Eva shook her head. I'm fine. You're bleeding. I'll handle it. You don't decide that, Thorn snapped. She tilted her head slightly. Is that an order, sir? He hesitated. The moment stretched, heavy, fragile, dangerous. Then, yes, it is. She didn't move. Not yet. Because something in the air shifted. a subtle tension humming through the night, the kind only a soldier with long-buried instincts could feel. Chun felt it too, Sarge. She looked up at the night sky, scanning the ridge lines by memory, by something deeper than sight. Then she stepped away from the sandbags, toward the breach, ignoring the colonel's order. Sergeant, Thorne barked, "Where are you going?" Eva didn't answer. Her boots crunched softly across the gravel. Her posture changed again, shoulders lowering, breathing slowing, steps quieting. Not like a soldier, like a hunter. The kind that knows danger doesn't always end when the shooting stops. The rest followed her gaze into the desert. Wind moved over the sand in long whispers. No movement, no shapes, no smell of cordite, no shifting shadows. But the hair on Diaz's arm stood up. "Sarge, what is it?" he whispered. Eva's expression didn't change. Not fear, not anger, just a sharpened stillness. "They weren't alone," she said. And her voice, low, certain, made everyone freeze. Thorne frowned. "Explain." She pointed to the sand, small disturbances in the loose dust. Footprints, but not from the fighters who breached the wire. These were lighter, faster, parallel. Tracking them. Someone had moved outside the perimeter after the attackers retreated. Someone still out there. Watching. Her pulse slowed even more. "They pulled back too fast," she said. "Professionals don't retreat without covering their rear. Someone was signaling their movements. Someone stayed behind." Miller now understood. A spotter or overwatch. Thorne's jaw tightened. Why would a spotter stay behind? Eva didn't blink, to confirm if the breach succeeded or failed. "And if it failed," Miller asked, "they'll report what they saw." Diaz swallowed. "Which is what exactly?" Eva paused, not because she needed to think, but because the truth landed heavier than any bullet. "They'll report me." Thorne's breath caught. He knew exactly what that meant. The FOB wasn't the only one surprised by tonight's defense. The enemy would be too. They expected a weak point, a soft target, logistics personnel, supply crates. Instead they found her. A ghost they weren't supposed to encounter. A threat they weren't supposed to know existed. A secret someone had buried in a neat, quiet file labeled logistics. A secret that had just revealed itself. Diaz stared at her. "But why you? Why would they care about?" Chun elbowed him gently. "Diaz, you saw her." Miller crossed his arms, expression grim. "Sir, if that spotter saw what she did, they're already on the move." Thorne clenched his jaw. "We need a perimeter scan." Eva shook her head. "It's too late, by now they're gone." "How can you be sure?" "Because she would have been gone by now." That was the truth she almost said, but didn't. Instead she stepped back from the breach, her breath steadying again. "You should get Chun and Diaz to medical." But Chun stepped in front of her, eyes wide with something between fear and respect. "Sergeant, what's going on? Who were those guys? Why did they come through this sector?" Eva looked at him, really looked at him. His face smeared with dirt, a fresh cut under his eye, shaking hands that had steadied because of her voice. He was too young for this kind of night, too good a person to carry it alone. "You didn't fail," she said softly. "You held." He blinked hard. But Diaz wasn't satisfied. "Sarge, why did they come here?" Eva glanced at Thorne. He understood instantly. This wasn't the enemy's random choice. This wasn't bad luck. Echo 7 wasn't just a forgotten storage depot. It was her assignment. And the attack had come directly to her doorstep. Too directly. "Sergeant Rostova," Thorne said quietly, "was this breach meant for you?" Her stillness was her answer. The air tightened around them like a fist. Miller's eyes widened. "Why would they target you?" Eva lowered her head. In her mind, something sharp, something dangerous, something she had suffocated for years stirred. Not a memory. A name, one she had carried like a curse, one whispered in briefings before missions that officially never existed, one carved into the skin of her wrist long before she wore the name Rostova. The Raven, she whispered without meaning to. Thorn heard, his eyes widened. Chun and Diaz didn't understand. Miller did, but only barely. Raven, what's that? Thorn didn't take his eyes off her. It's not what, it's who. Diaz frowned. Who? Thorn stepped toward her, voice dropping to a trembling whisper. A story, a ghost, an operative who was supposed to be dead. Chun swallowed. A ghost. Eva closed her eyes. Because the word fit too well. Thorn spoke again, barely audible. Is that you? She didn't answer with words. Her silence was enough. Her stillness was truth. And in that moment, with the desert wind brushing over the broken wire and the smell of gunpowder fatting into the night, the two young soldiers understood something they would never forget. The woman who had saved them was not who they thought she was. She had not been sent to Echo 7 as punishment. She had been buried there. And something in the darkness had just dug her back up. How do you face a truth you spent years trying to bury? Eva kept her eyes on the sand as the night wind cooled the sweat on her neck. The others waited, Chun shaking, Diaz pale, Miller stunned, and Thorn staring at her like a man looking at a puzzle he suddenly realizes is a bomb. Her silence only made the truth heavier. Finally Thorn spoke, not with anger, not with authority. With dread. Sergeant Rostova, who are you really? She didn't look at him. She didn't look at anyone. Her gaze stayed fixed on the breach, on the footprints fading into the desert, the ones belonging to the spotter who had come searching. For her. The wind scattered the last grains of sand from the tracks. They shouldn't know I'm alive, she whispered. Miller shifted uncomfortably. Alive, Sarge, what does that mean? Eva finally turned toward them slowly, carefully, like someone waking from a dream they fought too long to forget. Her voice came out low, almost fragile. It means the name in my file isn't the first I've worn. Diaz blinked. You used a different name. A different everything, she murmured. Chun took a hesitant step closer. But who? Thorn cut him off quietly. Voron. The desert seemed to suck the air from the night. Miller frowned. Voron, like Raven, what is that, some code name? Thorn swallowed. More than a code name, more than a soldier, more than an operative. He looked at Eva with something like fear. A myth, a weapon, a rumor in the intelligence community, a ghost we were told was gone. Chun stared. Gone as in transferred. No, Thorn said. Gone as in killed in action, years ago. Diaz whispered, but she's standing right here. Thorn nodded. Exactly. The soldiers exchanged uneasy looks. They didn't understand all the details, but they understood enough. Eva wasn't supposed to exist. Her eyes lowered. I'm not that person anymore. Miller studied her carefully. Then why did the enemy come for you? She didn't answer. Because the truth was a blade she didn't want to pick up again. Chun's voice trembled. Sergeant, did they attack Echo 7 because they knew you were here? Eva hesitated, only for a breath. Yes. Diaz's voice cracked. So they weren't trying to breach the perimeter. No. They weren't trying to destroy supplies. No. Then what? He whispered. Eva looked directly at him for the first time since the firefight. Her eyes were exhausted, old, haunted. They came to confirm a rumor. What rumor? That the Raven still breathes. Chun exhaled sharply. Miller stepped back. Diaz whispered a silent curse. Thorn's hand tightened at his side. He wasn't afraid of her. He was afraid of what it meant that she was here on his base, under his command, with a file built entirely from lies. He had punished her because he thought she was ordinary. He now understood how monumental his mistake had been. "Why were we told you were dead?" Thorn asked. Eva's jaw tightened. "Because I was supposed to be." "But you survived." "Barely." "And then what? They hid you in logistics." Her breathing slowed. "I hid myself." Chun blinked. "You hid from us, from the army." "No, from who I used to be." The wind shifted, carrying the faint echo of distant explosions. Rescue teams were still sweeping the base. But here, in this dim, broken corner of the fob, time seemed to freeze around her confession. Thorn stepped closer. "Sergeant, we need clarity. Why would a legendary classified operative suddenly vanish into a logistics role under a new name? Who authorized your cover?" Eva shook her head. "There was no authorization." "What?" "I walked away." "You deserted," Miller breath shocked. Her eyes snapped to him, not with anger but with a quiet firmness. "No, I completed my last mission. I followed every order. And when it was over, the agency declared me dead. No funeral, no official announcement, just a closed report and a classified file." "And you just accepted that?" Thorn asked. Eva gave a small, bitter smile. "I wrote it." Diaz gaped. "You wrote your own death?" "Yes." Miller muttered to himself. "Holy hell." Chun whispered, "But why?" Eva closed her eyes, and for a moment, just a moment, she wasn't the ghost that fought off a coordinated assault, wasn't the quiet, emotionless clerk, wasn't the unstoppable force from the mess hall. She looked like someone grieving something she didn't know how to mourn. "Because I wanted to disappear," she said. "Because I was tired of being a weapon. Because I didn't want commands or missions or kill orders. I wanted silence." Thorn's voice softened. "And did you find it?" Eva looked around them. At the bodies, the twisted wire, the scorch marks. "No." She turned away, walking slowly toward the container she had been cataloging before the attack. Her steps were limp. Her arm throbbed under the soaked bandage. She leaned briefly against the steel wall, steadying herself. Chun took a step forward. "Sarge, you need medical." She shook her head. Diaz frowned. "Why won't you let them help you?" "Because they'll ask questions," she whispered. "Because records won't match. Because fingerprints will flag. Because the moment I step into their system, the person I buried will come back to life." "You can't keep doing this," Thorn said. "Not alone." She turned toward him, face illuminated faintly by the floodlights. "I've been alone longer than I've been anything else." Miller looked down, guilt cutting across his face. He remembered the drink he poured over her head, the laughter, the humiliation, and now he understood what those eyes had held back that day, not anger. Restraint. Thorn exhaled. "You saved my base. You saved my soldiers. You saved me from losing good men tonight. You understand I can't ignore what you've done." Eva nodded. "I know. I need to write a report." "I know. People will ask questions I can't answer." "I know." He studied her carefully. "But I'll protect you. As long as you're under my command, I will not let anyone drag you back into whatever world you escaped from." Her eyes softened just barely. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Because," Thorn said, "I've been wrong before, but never this wrong, and I will not repeat it." His sincerity hit her deeper than the explosion had. But before she could respond, a shout echoed from the dark. "MEDICS coming through." Flashlights cut across the breach. A group of medics rushed forward, kits rattling, boots pounding. Their voices were loud, urgent, panicked. "Too close. Too official." Eva stepped back instinctively, too fast. Her breathing hitched. Her fingers twitched toward her hidden knife. Thorn saw it. He stepped in front of her, not protecting her from the medics, but protecting her identity from being discovered by accident. "Stand down," he barked to the medics. "Tend to the wounded on the south side first. We'll bring ours in a moment." The medics hesitated, confused, but obeyed. They veered away, heading toward the busier sectors. When they were out of earshot, Eva whispered, "Thank you." Thorn nodded once. "You're not a prisoner here, Sergeant. I'm not your enemy." She looked away, not ready to believe that yet, but maybe ready to hope. Chun stepped closer, voice small. "Sarge, what do we do now?" Eva exhaled slowly. "We clean up," she said. "We reset, we breathe." "And tomorrow?" Diaz asked. "Tomorrow," she said quietly, "I finish the inventory." It wasn't a joke. It wasn't denial. It was her way of saying she wasn't going anywhere. Not yet. Not until the past came knocking again. And they all knew now. It would. What were you supposed to do after surviving a night like that? Breathe, sleep. Pretend your hands weren't still trembling from the weight of what they'd done. Most soldiers had rituals. Some drank, some prayed, some shut down completely. Eva always cleaned. That was her ritual. Not because she loved order, not because she feared chaos, but because cleaning the weapon that saved your life was the closest thing to control a soldier ever really had. And tonight, with the medics diverted, with Thorn watching her like a man seeing a ghost, with Chun and Diaz whispering in exhausted disbelief, she needed that control more than she needed comfort. So when the last vehicles rumbled away, when the breach was cordoned off, when the base began to settle into an uneasy quiet, she returned to the narrow gap between the containers, her battlefield, her refuge, her stage of survival. She sat on an ammo crate slick with dust and sweat and dried blood. The M4 lay disassembled in front of her, each piece aligned on a rag, every part stripped down to metal and memory. She cleaned slowly, methodically, her movements precise like she was washing the night off piece by piece. Chun and Diaz were posted on the far side of the depot now, ordered to rest, though neither could. Miller was giving statements to the TOC. Thorn stood somewhere behind her, silent, respectfully distant. He didn't want to interrupt. Maybe he didn't know how to. Eva didn't acknowledge him. She focused entirely on the weapon, because focusing on anything else meant letting the thoughts she'd been suppressing flood the quiet. The bolt carrier group clicked gently against the brush. Thorn exhaled softly. "You don't have to finish that tonight." She didn't look up. "I know." "Then why do it?" "Because it deserves to be clean." Thorn folded his arms. "So do you." She paused just slightly, her fingers freezing on the bolt. Then she kept cleaning. Thorn took a careful step closer. Not too close, not enough to feel threatening, just enough for the edge of the portable floodlight to reach him. "I've commanded soldiers for a long time," he said quietly. "Decades, some brave, some reckless, some broken." She still didn't look at him. "But none like you." She ignored him, or tried to, but her hand slowed, betraying the crack in her armor. Thorn's voice softened further. "You don't have to be Voron anymore." The bolt slipped from her fingers. She caught it instantly, smooth, fast, but the mistake was already loud in the silence. Her jaw tightened. "Don't say that name." "Why? Because it hurts." "Because it isn't mine." Thorn studied her. "It was." "No. But it explains everything." Eva finally looked up. Her eyes were sharp, tired, and filled with something that looked like grief. Voron died in Cheska, in a tunnel 2 kilometers underground. Voron bled out alone and made sure the reports wrote it that way. I'm just what was left. Thorn shook his head slowly. "You don't walk away from who you are." "I did." "No," he said firmly. "You hid, not walked away. There's a difference." Eva's breathing thinned. "And now," Thorn continued, "your past has found you." She closed her eyes and leaned back against the container, the cold metal biting through her uniform. "I knew it would, eventually." "Then why come here?" he asked. "Why Fob Griffin? Why a military contract at all? You could have disappeared anywhere." She gave a hollow, tired laugh. I tried. The wind rustled the canvas tarps tied to a nearby generator, the sound like whispering ghosts. I drove trucks in Europe under a borrowed name, lived in hostels, slept in forests. Then I tried civilian logistics, paperwork, warehouses. Her eyes fell to the rifle parts. Numbers were quiet, predictable. And then, Thorne asked gently. And then the bombs started. He blinked. You were near an attack. Too near, she swallowed. Old enemies, old eyes. Someone recognized the way I moved, or maybe they just recognized the fear in mine. I don't know. But I realized that hiding wasn't peace. It was waiting. Thorne pieced it together. So you came back to the military. No, she said. I came back to the uniform, not the missions, not the killing. Her voice cracked for the first time. I thought if I hid well enough behind forms and shipments and crates, I could serve without hurting anyone ever again. You're not hurting people, Thorne said. You're protecting them. Eva stared at him. Not furious. Not defensive. Just tired. So were the people I killed tonight, she whispered. Thorne's expression softened. Those weren't civilians. They weren't innocents. No, she said quietly, but they were following orders just like I used to. Her voice trembled at the edges of something deep, something she had buried under reports and labels, and a logistics clerk's neat handwriting. Do you know what the last mission was? She asked suddenly. Thorne shook his head. She looked at the half-cleaned bolt, but she wasn't seeing it anymore. She was seeing something far darker. There was a cell in Vienna, she whispered, and a child inside the safe house. Thorne froze. Chun and Diaz, listening from afar, exchanged worried glances. Intel said the child was collateral, an orphan being used as a lookout. Her fingers curled. That was the order, neutralize the cell, all of it. Thorne said nothing. She continued, voice rasping. I followed orders, I made the kill clean, efficient, but when I looked at that child's eyes, she swallowed hard. They weren't afraid, they were empty, like they had already died before I got there. Her eyes filled with something hot, something breaking. And I realized I had become exactly what they feared, a ghost who moved too quietly, a shadow with a rifle. She shook her head slowly. I couldn't be that person anymore. I couldn't be Voron. Thorne exhaled heavily, the weight of her confession settling into his bones. You were a soldier, he said softly. You followed orders. You survived things no human should. That doesn't make you a monster. Eva looked at the weapon pieces again. I don't know the difference anymore, she whispered. A long silence stretched between them. Finally, Thorne moved closer and crouched beside her, carefully, respectfully. He didn't touch her. He didn't lecture her. He just spoke quietly. You do now. She looked at him through wet, exhausted eyes. How? Because you didn't let those boys die tonight. She blinked. You stepped between them and death, he said. Not for a mission, not for glory, not for orders, but because it was right. A tear slipped down her cheek, not dramatic, not broken, just honest. Eva wiped it with the back of her hand and resumed cleaning the rifle, breath trembling. Thorne stood slowly. You don't have to be alone anymore. She didn't look up, but her hands stilled for just a moment. Behind her, Chun and Diaz exchanged a silent glance, grateful but scared for her. Miller leaned against the dented container, watching her with a new expression that wasn't arrogance or disgust. Respect. And maybe regret. Eva finished the bolt, placed it beside the lower receiver, and picked up the rag to wipe the dust from her hands. Her eyes drifted to the desert, to the breach, to the footprints. They'll come back, she whispered. Thorne's jaw tightened. We'll be ready. She shook her head. Not for them. Then for who? She looked down at her wrist, the faint black wings of the raven tattoo hidden under dried blood and dust. For whoever sent them, she whispered. The wind shifted, cold and sharp. Chun shivered. Diaz looked over his shoulder nervously. Miller flexed his jaw. Thorne stepped closer, voice firm. "Sergeant, you're not facing them alone." Eva didn't answer. But for the first time since the fight, she didn't look like she wanted to disappear. She looked like she had something left to lose. And something left to protect. Why did the world feel quieter the morning after the violence? Not safer, never safer, but quieter in that uneasy way storms often leave behind. Like the air wasn't sure if the danger was gone or simply gathering strength somewhere out of sight. The sun had only just begun to push pale gold over the desert when Eva stepped out from between the containers. The base was stirring, slowly, cautiously. Soldiers moved with tired limbs, medics counted bandages, engineers repaired the breach. Life continued, even if the night had carved its mark into every corner of Echo 7. Chun and Diaz were sitting near the generator, sipping watery coffee from dented metal cups. They looked up when she passed, hesitant, like they weren't sure if they should speak to her or salute her or thank her. She spared them a small nod. It was enough. Miller stood a few meters away, arms crossed, staring at her like a man replaying the moment his ego shattered and something better grew in its place. He almost stepped forward. Almost. But he didn't. For once, he understood giving someone space was a form of respect. Eva kept walking until she reached the half-collapsed chain-link fence where the breach had been. The morning wind whispered through the twisted metal. The sand was mostly smooth now. Footprints faded. Blood dried. But she'd seen enough battlefields to know the land never really forgot. She stared at the horizon. Not because she expected the enemy to return in daylight, but because she needed to see the world without fear for just a moment. She needed to remember what peace looked like, even if it wasn't hers. Thorne approached quietly, boots crunching over gravel. "You should be resting." She didn't turn. "I slept." "Did you?" "No." He exhaled, standing beside her. Intel teams scanned the perimeter. No heat signatures, no returning movement. "They weren't coming back," she said. "We have patrols doubled, drones are up, recon." "Colonel." He paused. "They weren't coming back," she repeated. "Not last night, not today." He nodded slowly. "You think they'll regroup?" "No, they'll report. Someone sent them to confirm a rumor." Her voice tightened. "Now they have proof." Thorne studied her. "So you believe someone wants you found?" "I know someone does." "Any idea who?" Eva didn't answer immediately. Her eyes stayed fixed on the desert long enough that Thorne wondered if she even heard him. But she did. She'd heard every sound since she was a child, forced to hear things no child should. "My old handler," she said finally, "if he's still alive." Thorne's brow furrowed. "Handler?" She nodded. "The man who trained me. The one who taught me how to shoot, how to vanish, how to lie. The one who turned a desperate girl into something dangerous." "And why would he look for you now?" Her breath shook barely, but enough to betray what his name still did to her. "Because I wasn't supposed to walk away alive." Thorne stood silently at her side, not judging her, not prying, just present. "You know," he said gently, "you don't have to face him alone." She looked at him, not with defiance, not with fear, but with a quiet question. "Why are you helping me?" He seemed to read it on her face. "Because you've already bled for this base," he said softly. "For my men. And because no soldier, no person, deserves to carry a past like yours alone." She looked down, her hair shifting gently in the morning breeze. "Thank you," she whispered. Before he could answer, a sharp voice broke the stillness. "Colonel Thorne." They turned. A communications officer rushed toward them, breathless, headset dangling around his neck. "Sir, urgent message from HQ. They want you immediately." Thorne stiffened. "What kind of message?" The officer hesitated. glancing at Eva as if unsure whether he was allowed to speak in front of her. "Out with it," Thorne ordered. "Sir, command wants to debrief the breach. They're asking for a roster check." Eva froze. Thorne's jaw clenched. "They want everyone accounted for." "Yes, sir." "That means fingerprints." "Most likely. And updated photos, audio confirmations, maybe even." "No," Eva said abruptly. The officer blinked at her. Thorne stepped closer. "You won't be in that lineup." "Sir." "I'll handle command." The officer nodded nervously and sprinted back toward HQ. Eva stared at Thorne, shaken by the speed at which he defended her. "You can't cover me forever," she whispered. "No," he said, "but I can cover you today." Wind pressed softly against her back, warm and rising with the sun. She looked down at her hands, steady now, not trembling like the night before. "Colonel," she said quietly, "I don't want this base pulled into my past." Thorne crossed his arms. "What happens to you happens to us. That's how a unit works." "I'm not part of your unit." "Yes," he said simply, "you are." Her chest tightened. She had lost count of how many years it had been since someone said she belonged anywhere, since someone claimed her as one of their own. She wasn't sure whether to be grateful or afraid. The words caught in her throat. "If my handler knows I'm alive, he'll try to drag me back. Then we'll refuse." "You don't know him," she whispered. "He doesn't accept refusal." Thorne met her gaze steadily. "Neither do I." Something shifted inside her, small, fragile, but unmistakable. Hope. Not loud. Not bright. Just a flicker. She looked at the rising sun again, watching its light spill over the base she defended, the base she had not meant to care about. But she did. More than she expected. Chun and Diaz approached slowly, unsure if they were interrupting. Chun cleared his throat, voice shy. Sarge," he asked. "We saved you a cup of coffee. It's not great, but it's hot." Diaz held it out awkwardly. The steam curled into the cool air. Eva raised an eyebrow. "Why?" Chun shrugged, cheeks pink. "Because you were kind of amazing last night." Diaz nodded quickly. "And because we're really, really glad you didn't die." Miller stopped beside them. He didn't hand her anything. He didn't joke, didn't smirk. He just said, "I was wrong about you." 3 simple words, heavy enough to make her inhale sharply. Eva took the cup carefully. The warmth seeped into her hands, surprising her, comforting her. She looked at the young soldiers, shaken, scraped, but alive because she had chosen to stay and fight. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like a ghost. She felt like a soldier. Chun bit his lip. Are you staying here with us?" Diaz nudged him. "Dude, don't make it weird." Miller glanced at her, quietly hopeful. "Yeah, Sarge, you sticking around?" Eva looked at Thorne. He didn't speak. He didn't push. He just waited, letting her choose. She looked at the broken fence, at the repaired containers, at the desert stretching out like an unfinished sentence. She thought of the man who trained her, thought of what he might do when he learned she wasn't dead. Then she looked at the 3 young soldiers, hopeful, anxious, loyal in the way people only are after they've seen you bleed for them. Finally, she looked at the cup of warm coffee in her hands. "I'm not going anywhere," she said softly. Chun grinned. Diaz exhaled. Miller smiled wide, honest. Thorne nodded once, relief flickering across his face. Eva turned her gaze back to the horizon. The ghosts of her past were still out there. Her handler would come. The rumors would spread. But for the first time since she wrote her own death certificate, she didn't feel like running. She felt like standing. And maybe healing. Because sometimes survival isn't a mission. It's a choice. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.